Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Paige Cerulli, and I'm a writer with iAdvance Senior Care, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick notes. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar, but you can ask questions at any time. If you look at your control panel, there's a gray questions bar toward the bottom. Please use that to submit any questions you have. We'll be reserving the last 10 minutes or so of the session for a Q&A session. At this point, we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar, The New Wave of Food Service Technology in Senior Care. I'm pleased to introduce the host for our panel, Sean Rowe, President and CEO of MealSuite.
Thanks, Paige. Good afternoon, everyone. So excited to have you here today. We're going to have a really fun hour having a great discussion. We've got an incredible panel here with us today with an incredible reach and years of experience in the industry. Our panel, their organizations reach close to 13,000 senior living and care communities. So they have so many different backgrounds, from an operations to dietary, clinical, food distribution, and so much more. So I think we're going to have a really great conversation. Today, just to kind of set the stage of what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about change. We're going to talk about technology, and we're going to talk about technology and how it can help us with change when it's done correctly. Now, I could introduce these individuals, but I know they're going to do a much better job telling us about their background and history. So in 30 seconds each, Jill, if I could pick on you first, would you mind giving us a little background on who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Jill Kuntz. I run all of the operations for strategic dining services and for non-traditional business within CCL, which is part of Compass Group. And I've been in the operations side my entire life, born and bred in a restaurant, moved into senior living a few years back, and definitely have a passion for this space.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Jill. Jessica, we'll go to you next.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jessica Smith. I'm a registered dietitian by trade, having spent most of my career in different leadership positions in healthcare, food service operations, and acute care and senior living. I'm currently a national field manager for menu solutions with USFoods, and I support healthcare customers in implementing tools and technology that help them manage costs, drive efficiencies, and improve resident satisfaction. And I'm really excited to be here today, so thanks for asking me to join.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jessica. And Ellen, you're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellen Lowre, and like Jessica, I am a registered dietitian by trade. Worked hard for that. Don't ever want to give it up. Currently, Vice President of Nutrition, Wellness, and Sustainability with CCL, overseeing over 1,000 communities from senior living and beyond. Really leading all strategic initiatives for clinical care, nutrition and wellness, and of course the technology we use to enable, our team members and engage our residents. So excited to be here and join the discussion as well.
Fantastic. Well, really appreciate you all joining us today. And before we dive in to the heavy stuff, let's have a fun little rapid round. I'm going to put 1 minute on the timer. And we want to get to know you all a little bit better. It's a small industry. You never know when you're going to bump into someone at a trade show and get to connect. So, can I start off? Jill, if you were a flavor of ice cream, what flavor would you be?
Mint chocolate chip.
Oh, good choice. Jessica, what's one piece of technology you couldn't live without?
Is it too generic to just say the internet? Is that too broad?
No, it's a technology. Absolutely.
It's the foundation for all my addictions. So,
Ellen, how would you describe what you do in one word?
A conductor.
Jill, if you could dine with any chef or food icon, who would it be?
Anthony Bourdain.
Good choice. Jessica, if you were an emoji, which one would you be?
Well, today it would be the cold face emoji because it's unseasonably cold here in Tennessee.
I think we're all feeling that. Ellen, what's something that made you smile today?
My first sip of coffee.
And last one, Jill, have you ever tried surfing?
No, but it's on my bucket list.
Well, I'm a big fan of surfing, and we're going to do a fun little segue, that question. And surfing and change actually have a lot in common. You may not believe me, but I'm gonna show you why. So I want to start off with a fun little story time, and you can choose to close your eyes, listen in. I think that the majority of us are likely in a cold location today, and we were probably all wishing that this was us. We were all on a beach somewhere, feeling that nice warm sand and water against our toes. So I want you to imagine that you're on your first surf trip. And you're on a board, you're paddling out. The water is warm on your skin. You can feel the sun on your back. Hopefully you have enough sunscreen on. And as you're paddling out and you're going out there, you look out to your left and there's your family, your friends. Everybody's joined you on this surf trip. Everybody's trying it for the first time. And then you keep paddling. You look to your right. You see a nice sandy beach. There's a dolphin in the background. Everything is just perfect. Then you look forward again. And suddenly you see this massive wave that's just about to crash right on top of you. And sure enough, it hits. You're tumbling in the water. You're trying to figure out what way is up. You're holding onto the board. The wave passes. You're surfacing up. You got water up your nose. It's in your ears. You're clearing your eyes out. You're trying to figure out what's going on. And then as you look back, you see all of your friends, and they're all riding on the wave. They're smiling, they're laughing, they're having a great time. And you're stuck in the back. The reality is that sometimes change feels exactly like this experience. When you can see change in advance, you see the wave of change coming at you, and you can prepare and get ready to jump on that surfboard and ride it in. It's a thrilling experience. But when you don't see it coming and it's the last second, it feels like you're just constantly either treading water or getting water out of your nose. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about how can we see some of these upcoming changes in our space so that we can be prepared and we can ultimately ride this wave together. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret or two and share my thoughts on some of my predictions on what we think is going to be ultimately some of the changes in the waves we're going to see. So we don't want to look like the one on the left. We want to look like the one on the right. And this is the first prediction. I think we can all agree rising resident and family expectations is a change that we've seen for many, many years, but it's really started to accelerate recently. And there's actually a lot of data around this because we're reaching this point in time where the sandwich generation is now the generation that are ultimately generally between about 30 and 55, where they've got children and they've got parents, and those parents are starting to go into environments that might need care. And this sandwich generation grew up, they've had to adopt technology. Things are moving faster than ever. They expect answers quickly. They expect transparency. So when they're stepping in and helping their parents choose a path and choose a location and ultimately be a part of that experience, they have very different expectations of what they're going to see. And then the resident also has gone through many different changing experiences over the last 20 years too, in terms of their expectations from a culinary experience, social experience, different textures, diets, all those different things, which ultimately feed into the next part, which is the dining becoming such a big driving differentiator. Dining is such a huge social component to everyone's day, especially in senior care or care communities. It's a moment to sit down, have normalcy. It's also a moment to build great relationships. It's a moment to have laughs. And when families are helping make decisions for their loved ones, they're often, in many cases, feeling guilty that they can't support that person aging at home or that they can't support them in other ways. So they want to really make sure that they're experiencing a great social experience, that they've got lots of choice, that it feels just like home. And that's why dining has become such a scrutinized component of everyone's selection process when they're looking for new communities, because they put so much emphasis behind it. Add on top of that elements around the pushes towards more healthy living, different diets and textures, the desire to have a more personalized experience in their care journey, as well as just their personal journey too, is putting a lot of pressure on everyone. We also, of course, have staffing and inflation challenges. We were just chatting before the webinar about just how every market is so different. If you have tourism in that market, what the local culinary market looks like, who you're up against. If you've got someone down the street paying $19 to put away shopping carts or stock shelves, it's really hard to get someone if your budget's 13. Not only that, but if you look at the economic pressures of changes to immigration policy, low birth rates, and the fact that by 2030 it's one in every 5 people will be over 65, our labor pool is actually going to continue to get smaller and smaller over the next 5 years. So if we think it's bad now, just continue to watch the progression. And then when we talk about the labor pool, we can also talk about the fact that the ones that we have available that are coming in is a completely different generation that you have to take a course to learn how to understand what they say half the time. Because at the end of the day, this next generation that's coming in grew up on technology. Good luck asking them to write a handwritten chit with someone's order on it. Handwriting, half of them haven't written on a piece of paper in 10 years. They are a generation that are used to instant gratification, multitasking, very quick feedback. They seem really confident, but at the same time too, they might lack the personal skills. So we've got that combined with, then on the flip side, our other side of our staffing pool, which are hesitant to technology and don't want change. So there's all these different headwinds we're dealing with. And then the last thing is AI. Where is AI going? What is it? Is it going to take all of our jobs? I have great news. It's not going to take all of our jobs. It's going to make us all rock stars, but it's still incredibly terrifying because none of us know really how it works and what is it actually doing under the hood. These are some of my predictions. We're going to dive into a bunch of questions around this. To the panel, do you feel like we've missed anything? I think we're spot on. You think I'm crazy on any of these?
No, not at all.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's do a little poll with the audience, and let's go ahead and fire up that poll. And we'd love to actually hear from you. If you could go ahead and choose, the question is, which of these upcoming waves is keeping you up at night? Is it resident satisfaction and expectation demands? Is it dining, driving differentiation? Is it staffing and inflation, having to do more with less? How AI will impact our industry, or all the above? Give you a few more seconds to make a choice. All right, let's go ahead and show the results. Very interesting. So everyone is really feeling the staffing and inflation, doing more with less. And I think that's not only, of course, staffing too, it's supply chain. And the reality is, right, our budgets haven't kept up with what we're dealing with, and it just gets harder and harder every single year, it seems like. So not surprised to see those results. So thank you for participating in that. So let's dive into our first stage of our journey. Today, we're actually all going to work to become pro surfers. And the first step is you probably don't want to go surfing until you dip your toes in. I don't know about you. I like to dip my toes in the pool before I jump in. Never know what you're jumping into. And that's typically the first step if you're going to go surfing too. You don't want to go surfing if it's minus 30. So some of us, when it comes to technology, could be all in already and fully optimized. For some of us, we're just getting started and everything's on paper and manual. Think of dipping your toes as maybe it's the first time implementing a basic technology in your operation and taking that first step. Ellen, would love to ask you a question. What are 3 common reasons that you see operators hesitate the idea of like stepping in, dipping their toes into the technology pond? And in your experience, have you seen any ways to address these particular concerns or misconceptions?
Yeah, great question. And I think, you know, how you've kicked off our panel today, just talking about change, I think is certainly kind of the overarching theme, you know, fear of change. How will this affect me? How will this affect my job? To the resident, you know, kind of the same narrative. So I think, you know, breaking it down to some challenges and how we, you know, work together to overcome them is one. How do we change the narrative on change of the daily operations? How will this disrupt, you know, what I do day to day? And I think, you know, using the technology that we have in place to showcase that This actually is making your job more efficient. It's simplifying things. It's, providing more safety mechanisms, for our residents that are in, skilled nursing or rehab with special diets and textures. Sure, there is a disruption in kind of the learning of that at the beginning and the building of that, but the payoff is, monumental, once you get that established. So I think, overcoming that fear of, how this affects the day-to-day. Similarly, kind of feeding into, how do I learn this? I have staff, that, they maybe still have a flip phone, or, they're, technology averse. You set, kind of that up with the waves and the different, workforce we'll have in place. And I think there are statistics that show that, more and more, older adults, are using smartphones, are using, are online, placing orders and doing things. So I think, showing that we have different opportunities to learn the technology, that could be, whether self-learning or side-by-side learning, will help kind of increase that staff adoption, as well as, if you have a resident-facing technology too. So just making sure you, cover all those bases with all the different styles of learning. And then I think just, budget, we can't afford this, or, really anything related to the cost. And I think you set it up nicely, Sean, just talking about, the changes in our workforce, the increase, of those over 65 that, is coming down, in the next decade. We really are poised at this point to really implement technology to help ease those changes that we have coming. So although it may be an upfront cost, that would be, a savings, whether it be within workforce, within, efficiencies with less food waste, more accuracy, for, different things around the, the dining operations. So, really just kind of getting over those initial hurdles and showing some examples of how we've seen that, benefit our partners down the road.
Love it. Absolutely. Spot on. I think those are some really great call-outs. Jill, kind of to continue on that, when one of your customers is wondering, where do I begin with food service technology? Imagine they have nothing and they're just saying, we know we need to change. We just don't even know where to start. Like, what have you recommended to them as a best first step for starting to explore options in technology?
That's a great question, and I agree, Ellen. I think you really nailed hitting a lot of those pieces. I think there is this large appetite right now for technology integration, because it sounds, everybody knows we need to get there and that it's important, but truly understanding what does that mean, I think is where I would start. And so I almost look at it like a grid, and on the vertical side is kind of willingness to change, and then the other side is honestly capacity to change. And that capacity to change is not just with the residents, to all the points that you made of who's got technology, and the younger generation has the immediate need for gratification and satisfaction. But if you want to start to integrate technology into your workplace, you have to ask the hard questions. One, are the residents willing to change? Is my staff willing to change? And where do I feel? Like, how hard do I want to push on that change? Because it is a disruption. And there's all of the spider webs that come with that, right? Of, do we have the financial budget? What else do I have to do? How much of a lift? How much of this is interruption? How is my satisfaction as it exists today? Is this really going to, how long of a runway until it actually gets to where I need it to? Those are all kind of those spider webs. But the one question that we don't do a good enough job asking is, does my staff have the ability to change? And there are a lot of communities out there that have folks that are amazing individuals, and they have been with some of these communities for 30 years, 40 years, and asking them to then completely change their way of doing something and follow a screen and log a temperature and take an order, not by writing that shit. That is a major change for them. And if we have some really wonderful communities out there that have an amazing amount of tenure, and that's a cultural shift. That's a conversation that really needs to happen kind of with a larger audience, let alone the residents, right? You know, I've got plenty of client groups that we've talked about integration of technology, and the amount of integration changes vastly when we have that conversation. And it can be a staged approach. It doesn't mean that you can't get fully integrated with, you know, all of the bells and whistles one day, but really understanding what the need is, I think, is where you need to start, and the willingness.
Couldn't agree more. And we could spend an entire hour just talking about the dynamics and also the psychology and the physiological reasons why what you just described when it comes to having someone. The reality is, and I love the science around habit formation and like pattern creation, right? You think when you hire a new team member and they start on their first day, if you have the right onboarding, you can mold them to do whatever you want them to do and they will follow it to a T, right? No pushback. But as soon as they've been in that role for a year doing the same thing every day, and all of a sudden you change a small component of their day, the world goes upside down. Like 99% of people will freak out in that moment. Everybody hates change, and it's actually psychologically because our brains want to conserve energy. So our brains create a neural pathway. So when we go into a new environment, we're open to ideas because of the fact that we are taking on a new job. We know that we have to do a good job that ultimately generates money so we can get a house and pay for food and we can survive and build a family. But once we are doing that job and we feel like we've programmed in the requirements on how to do that job, changing that job requires a complete rewire of the brain, and the brain goes, whoa. I don't want to do that because this is actually going to take more energy to undo my habits and rebuild them. And I'm not in a threat state of losing this job. I don't want to change and use that. So there's a lot of really interesting science around it, and how, and hopefully we can speak to some of it later about ways to approach change management. And there's a bunch of books too, if anybody wants to read on them about habits. It's fascinating. So, and that was a great segue. You mentioned about, you know, really deciding the right technology to and choosing the right solution that's going to potentially set you up for success, in that not starting off too fast, right? It's that whole idea of like, what can our team handle? Everybody wants to go big and, oh, I want a point of sale system and robots and digitize my kitchen and all these other things, and everything's automated, but they don't even have the basics. So the team can't handle it while the executive thinks it's a great idea. So Jessica, just like surfing, you know, you got to pick the right board, right? If you're going out surfing, you're not going to get the little tiny board for tricks. You're going to get the big wide one so you can have a chance of standing. You know, technology is very similar, of looking at like integrations, capabilities, features, all those different things that come into effect when you're choosing a technology. I know you see this all the time across the board with your Blueprint 360 product that you guys have, and I'm really excited to get your thoughts later on kind of how some of that plays into this. But Jill, I know also recently we've been working through a few projects on some of these things too. So I really want to get your thoughts on some of these sections. So maybe I'll start with Jessica, actually. Jessica, what criteria do you think food service leaders should use to research and ultimately like choose their technology options?
Yeah, thank you. So I think Jill, I kind of wrote down something she said. She wrapped it up saying you have to identify your need and your willingness. So I think first and foremost, just getting clarity on what you're trying to solve for, what your challenges are, because Sean, you said everyone wants everything, right? The best that's out there, but really, what do you need? What are you trying to solve for? What are your pain points? Not just now, but I think it's important to look forward, right? 3 years, 5 years down the road, and try to find a solution that can solve your short and long-term goals. You know, do you anticipate changing your dining program down the road, or renovations for the future? Because the best technology is the one that's going to address all your pain points, both current and future state, because you don't want to be in a situation where 3 years down the road, you're reevaluating your decision because you've evolved, you know, so you want your technology to evolve with you. And then I think also looking, I think someone talked about integration earlier. So taking a look at a complete solution that integrates well with any current technology you have in place, whether it's a finance system or a resident management tool, looking for something in one platform, because I don't know about you guys, I want things streamlined. I don't want to juggle multiple systems and try to keep a pulse on many different pieces of technology. So one that's fully integrated and is an all-in platform, from menu planning to procurement and potentially point of sale if needed. And then right, so we've already talked about cost, and I don't want to overlook how important that discussion is and when you're considering technology, because we're all trying to stretch our dollars the best we can. But I want to caution people, I think making a technology decision just on cost alone can be a mistake. What you really want to look at is, what is the return on your investment? Are you gaining efficiencies? Are you reducing waste, streamlining processes? Our poll identified labor and staffing as our #1 concern. So how can we utilize our technology so that we have the time, we can automate the things that need to be automated, and then, use our spare time for that personal touch, whether it's teaching and training your frontline staff or spending time with your residents, because that's where the relationship is what matters, and that's where we should be spending our time. So I think all of those considerations, along with ease of use. We were talking about just staff change, and we know everyone can use a smartphone these days. I think that's well established. So can we choose a technology that's pretty intuitive, similar to a smartphone, that's easy to use, and does that technology and that vendor provide resources, training, and ongoing support that's really going to make a true partnership, so that you're not going alone through the journey. So I think if you keep all of those in mind, it really will set yourself up to picking a solution that meets your unique needs in your operations.
Absolutely. Yeah, great call outs. I love that. Jill, I'd be curious to get your thoughts. What's a technology or a trend that you think isn't being talked about enough? Are you seeing any communities benefiting from it? Like, what are your thoughts on kind of where things are going in the future?
Yeah. Well, similar to what Jessica said, I think you have to look at, the big picture and see what's evolving, right? So don't make a decision for today, make a decision for that's going to benefit you for the long haul. I think I'm going to answer this question in twofold. One, because I think that people, as I mentioned, get very excited about technology integration. That sounds sexy, that feels important, but they have an idea of what they want to accomplish, and what they're really looking for is much different, right? When you really start to ask the right questions. So I go back to kind of what you just had talked to Jessica about, what we talked about earlier, and I challenge people to, when you're really saying that you want to integrate technology, not only that willingness and that capacity level, but like, what are you truly trying to solve for, to Jessica's point? Because I would put money on the fact that what you think you're trying to solve for, and when you really write it down and get to the bottom of it, it evolves into something much different. I've had recent examples of that where it was, integration into an EMR Connect, right? And really what you were trying to solve for, come to find out after asking many questions, is that you're really trying to leverage not the people portal piece. It's not about making sure that you understand that Mrs. Smith ate today and what she ate, but you're actually diving into the micronutrients of what she specifically had and using that data to then evolve menu planning process. So like where you started and where you ended up were two very different conversations. And Sean, I know you know that situation very well. To answer your second, to answer your question, what I think we're not talking about enough, that I think is definitely coming fast and furious, is, from my experience recently, I think that this AI integration is a big thing. I think that, for Ellen and Jessica, both kind of dietitians, worked really hard to become that. I know that there would be nothing more that they would love in the world to be able to have some type of AI built into their menu platform that helps them vet the nutritional adequacy of menus and things of that nature, so that's it's a mindless job at that point within a menu, right? They've done all the work to vet it, extend it, do whatever it needs to do. So I think that there's an opportunity for AI, specifically as it relates to not just the validation, but that lends to the user piece, right? Like, it needs to be simple to all of that's something that we're not talking about. We're trying to add enhancements and make things really pretty and add a lot of buttons and give a lot of variety. But at the end of the day, the end user just needs it to be simple. It needs to do all of those things, but it needs to be simple. And so I think that's one thing. The second thing is integration to other back office systems. It showed in that poll that the overwhelming feeling was, what keeps you up at night is doing more with less. Well, then it needs to be simple. And two, it needs to be able to, there's a heavy need right now for integration and visibility and transparency so that you know where all of those dollars are going, where you know where that data is going, and they need to talk to one another. So I think that's something that we're seeing a lot right now that's going to continue to become a trend, that menuing software and technology integration needs to feed into, you know, the Yardies of the world and some of those other kind of full back office suites. Those back office suites need to be able to pull the technology integration of the invoicing systems. They all need to be able to talk to each other. And I think that's going to become a very big piece as people are continuing to focus on the data accuracy and making decisions based off of data and financial needs. I think that's coming, you know, fast and furious.
I couldn't agree more. And everything you highlighted around AI there, that is the power of AI, is ultimately to do simple tasks that take us a long time, that we can divert that energy and attention to the things that AI can't solve. AI can't solve staffing challenges. AI can't sit down and speak with a resident. AI can't build a great team and teach them how to deliver great service or handle risk or optimize compliance. So that's where I see the power of AI going, is exactly to your point. We spend, every customer, you know, spends hours and hours, weeks and weeks every year customizing menus. How do we get it to the point a year from now so that you just talk to your menu platform and say, take this base menu, adjust it to be under $7 a day or under $10 a day, and target it for Central Texas. And it automatically goes and says, I'm going to swap these out for this. I'm going to automatically adjust it. I'm going to bring your proteins and make sure they're all aligned. I'm going to optimize your stock ingredients so that you can minimize the amount of SKUs in your fridge and freezer. I'm going to go ahead and optimize your pack sizes. I'm going to go in as a part of that too and do the nutritional analysis based on what the dietitian said. And then it sends a nice little email to the dietitian saying, here's a comprehensive report of the analysis on the menu that meets all these requirements. Would you like to approve or reject it? And then the dietitian can just go, reject, I don't like this. And the AI comes back with a revision. And then at that point, like, think about the time we've saved. Now we can go and sit down with our residents and go, look at what we're preparing. Is this meeting your needs? Let's go tweak it again. And then the dietitians can work on personalized care experiences, going back to the idea of rising resident and family demands, and really spend their time communicating and doing what they do best, which is personalizing experience. So there's lots coming there. Now, on our next section, you know, we've chosen our board. Let's go back to our journey. We're starting to paddle out together. And Jill, you just hit on a bunch of these things, some things you talked about, really about the fact that all the systems have to talk together for efficiency. If your point of sale isn't automatically pushing guest charges to your accounting system and an overbilling and an extra glass of wine, odds are that little piece of paper isn't getting there, and you got somebody manually keying something in and wasting their time doing it. So we need to really work to see, how do we adopt technology and bring the entire team together, which is not just our dining team, but it's also staff, it's residents, it's finance, it's IT, it's nursing. It could be so many different teams that we're working with ultimately at the end of the day. And I think, Jill, you spoke to it really well. Ellen, I'm sure you see this everywhere you go. When it comes to technology, like, what roles should departments play when it comes to technology? Like, do you feel like we should be getting out of the silo and having culinary, finance, IT, nursing all in the same sandbox when making decisions to implement technology? Have you seen any good examples of people like bringing together and creating a team to do these as opposed to being in a silo of just the kitchen?
I mean, 100%. And I think, you know, we've been leading up to this conversation, you know, through the other questions you've been asking, Sean, and the ultimate question is what is the ultimate resident and customer experience that the community is looking for? And that does not sit with just, you know, the culinary department. You know, the culinary programming, the style of menus, the cost of the menus, you know, the staffing that's available, you know, within the kitchen, you know, is one thing. It's also, you know, the hospitality side, you know, of the equation. You know, whether that sits duly, you know, within the dining department, does it sit within the nursing department? If you're looking at a skilled side or an assisted living side, like, what's the experience, you know, to the resident going to be? So you 100% need to circulate, have a conversation, work together, whether it be from the beginning stages of, here's the technology, here's how it can improve the nursing experience for, the resident and customer satisfaction, how it can ease, the nurse's job, because there's no more to that earlier, like writing it down on a piece of paper, doing the phone call, faxing it, emailing it, whatever for the diet change. All of that is automated through EMR Connect, through very simplified, items. If someone's on a texture modification or has an allergen, there's far less, human error components within that both nursing and dining has to, kind of, stress about. What is needed to build that infrastructure is IT involved, for if there's, an order taking capability, whether it's at the bedside, at the dining table, whatever it may be. Does it have the Wi-Fi components? Do we need to have different, electrical outlets and, routers available so we can print in the kitchen and print, at the nursing, side, all different pieces that, IT is part of that conversation, not only, for that, but, what are their goals as an organization with, innovation and technology, at the community, and really keeping that, team involved. And then, accounting and finance, if you're dealing with, spend downs with, our customers and residents' money, whether it be through the dining, through our bistros, through other outlets, and beyond, how are we, summarizing that information to accounting, to the residents, and really making sure all of that is integrated and meets the needs, so, I mean, that's just kind of at the top level coming to mind for all the departments that would need to be. And of course, we want to keep, the dietitian not off in a silo, and that everyone is, so we've got multiple departments, and that need to be talking to each other, really invested in the process. And then I think everyone becomes a champion from there and can talk about how it's going to improve, the efficiency of their job, the experience of the resident and the customer. And they really feel a sense of ownership, to make that successful.
Great call outs. I can't count the amount of times, and I know, Jessica, you've seen this a bunch too, the amount of times that we see this enthusiastic organization that comes in, they want to deploy technology, they want to get menus and recipes and all these things and running, and we get an order and you like start talking to the locations and you find out that this decision was made in this silo, like it was made in nursing, and they didn't even talk to the kitchen team who are responsible for actually managing the menus and the recipes. They just made the decision because they wanted to reduce risk when it came to allergen and dietary restriction. So as a result, you have this project where all of a sudden they sign a contract and then everybody gets together after the fact, and it's just everything goes off the rails because everyone has to work together on these things no matter what. So it's better to get them together and paddle out as that team. And I'd love to do a quick poll, which can also kind of guide some of our conversation points as we go to the second half of the webinar here. And I want to launch a poll. Let's go ahead and launch it. The poll is, which area of your operation do you think could benefit most from integrated technology? Questions are how we take and communicate orders, production management, menu planning, manage resident dietary data, and procuring ingredients. Give you a couple seconds to make a selection there. And let's go ahead and look at those results. Very interesting. So it looks like a bit of an even spread across the board, taking communicating orders, production management, menu planning, managing resident dietary data, and surprisingly, procuring ingredients is the lowest one. And I find that one really interesting, especially when we look at costs and the fact that if you think about it, if we can in the future really tune that in, just imagine if we could save 5 or 10% from a procurement or a waste standpoint by optimizing what we're buying. You think if you're spending $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year in groceries, you don't have to save much to ultimately pay for an entire technology platform. So very interesting thoughts on that one. Let's go ahead, we can close that poll. And Jill, I'd love to just continue on some of the topics that actually Ellen brought up and what we're just talking about there about, when you do make a decision to deploy technology. You've done your due diligence, you've picked the ideal one that you think, you've worked across departmentally. As a leader, what steps do you take to make sure your teams are comfortable and confident with the idea of that new technology before you actually go live with it?
Good question. I think through experience, you have to give yourself a runway of practice, right? Just like any good restaurant opening, you always launch a menu and you do a soft opening, or you have the restaurant closed because you need to train the kitchen dish, the kitchen on the dishes, and then the servers. So basically, you need a sandbox to play in, whether it's because you're trying to make sure that you're validating and integrating within the accounting side, or if it's just the actual dining side. There's nothing worse than trying to get everybody excited about change and going live with this integration of technology at whatever level, and then it fall flat on your face because the residents now are waiting an hour for their meal because something's not working, right? So I think the short answer to that is that you really have to practice, and you have to pulse check yourself, and you have to stress test yourself a bit to make sure that when you do actually launch it, that you've had the ability to work out at least 80% of the bugs so that it is more welcomed as an adaptive change.
That's a great call out. And one of the biggest gaps I often see is the involvement of residents in these changes, because whether it's residents or patients, anytime I've been on site when a new technology has been deployed, it's never going to be perfect, right? Your servers might be moving to tablet-based ordering and they're trying to figure it out, or the kitchen's running behind because they're changing something, or maybe the way the menus show up on the wall is different. And often the resident doesn't know what's going on, and therefore they just see it as a burden. They don't understand, we're putting in a new system because it's going to make it faster, and our goal is to reduce the time from when you sit down to the time that you receive your first meal by 8 minutes. We want to improve our accuracy to make sure that your favorite selections are available all the time. We want to get our menu costs better aligned so that we can put higher quality ingredients on it by reducing waste. And as a result, right, you deal with a lot of resistance and pushback from residents. So Jessica, would love to hear from you, what are other ways you've seen people involve residents and patients in the planning process to make sure that they feel a part of the journey?
Yeah, great question. And to your point, sometimes we do see resistance, and I know that our residents can be slow to adopt technology, but I think it would be a huge mistake to underestimate their interest and ability to participate in the process. And I think also, really just keeping it overly simple, we love to complicate things in healthcare. And so sometimes a resident's perspective can really ground us and bring us back to the basics. To our point all the way in the beginning, what are we trying to solve for? What are we trying to accomplish? And so I think that if it were me, the first thing I would do is find a resident champion, someone who has some interest in technology, who has a voice among the community, that will be a champion for you and kind of a liaison between you and the other residents to kind of get them engaged and get their buy-in in the whole process. And I think that in addition to that, of course, right, a communication plan well in advance. Start communicating, whether it's through something like a technology committee, where you can get feedback or discuss upcoming steps in the process, or if it's just as simple as posting announcements or resources, in high traffic areas to make sure everybody's kept in the loop. But definitely think it would be a mistake not to include your residents, getting their feedback at a minimum through a simple survey if necessary. But I think a combination of all of those things is really going to get you some different levels of feedback, but more importantly, just the buy-in, because I think we can all confidently say that if our residents are not on board, the pushback is going to make it that much more difficult. And so spending that time up front to explain it, get them engaged is really going to go a long way in terms of a successful execution when you are going through that process.
I have to just jump in and say to commend Jessica. I think that was spot on. There is no such thing as over communicating in senior living. There is no such thing. You're spot on. And so besides the stress testing, we have a great example in California where we just launched everything, right? We launched a full platform of digital kitchens, point of sale, reservation management, right? And And having those focus group conversations with those residents and keeping them completely aligned. We did all the stress, so we did it all the right way. But then on opening night, it wasn't perfect, but they felt committed and engaged as part of the solution. So it made it a little bit easier. You're 100% right. There's no such thing as over communicating. And that is like the key to the success. Spot on.
Absolutely. Great recommendations. And technology, especially when it's like a point of sale or tablets, involving the residents, make it a celebration. You should have balloons in the dining room. You should be celebrating it. You should give out a free glass of wine to everybody that evening for residents that give feedback and help the server learn the system and bring confidence to it. There's so many ways to get that adoption. So let's go to our last kind of stage of learning how to surf, which is catching your first wave. And you jump on, it feels a little wobbly, it takes time to refine it. You got to keep tweaking your technique to ultimately get it to where you want it to be. Jessica, maybe we can continue on some of the train of thought that you had there before. I'd love to know, in your experience working with single and multi-site clients, how do you recommend that they actually monitor the technology's performance and ultimately like gather feedback from staff, residents, families to keep them on the loop after that initial first day of launch?
Right. So great, follow up from the previous discussion. We talked about there's no such thing as over communicating. So let's not just stop as soon as we're implemented. Let's continue to have routine check-ins, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days, whatever cadence that you see most appropriate for what you're doing, but making sure we're routinely continuing whatever your communication plan was before, all the way through to where you feel like you're in a really good place. Things are running smooth, things are going well. But in addition to that, utilize any kind of analytics that are available within the technology solution itself, right? Is there opportunity to identify usage and performance? Because those analytics are going to give you some insight onto opportunities to continue to train your staff, or again, facilitate communications with your residents about any opportunities to improve. And I think the other thing is just simple observation. See where there are bottlenecks or inefficiencies in your new system. I often see, especially with staff, initially they don't trust the technology. So whether it's a production sheet or procurement, you may have a beautiful system that generates a procurement order or purchase order for you, but we typically see some hesitation in people trusting those numbers, and so people continue to do a manual walkthrough on a piece of paper where they're writing everything down. So look for those opportunities and see where you see those types of bottlenecks where you can train staff and work through the fear of giving into that technology, because in the long run, all of those things are just going to ensure a better, well-rounded strategy and process to keep moving forward with your technology. So those are my thoughts.
Comments. Absolutely. Ellen, would love to know your thoughts. If you've ever seen a time where a team rose to the challenge when learning or adopting new technology, and if there was any learnings around resilience, adaptability, anything that you kind of took away from that you'd be willing to share with the group?
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge, especially when you are trying to meet so many different audiences, whether it be different times of staff, different dining room types, whether it be in an independent living or, assisted living or skilled nursing style. Are you trying to train, nursing staff as well? So I think what we've seen that's been fun is, try to make it fun, can you offer a little bit of a challenge, a prize challenge for the department that can complete all the trainings the soonest, and certainly show some effectiveness and application. Having call outs or prizes, very small, could be something very little, like a little $5, $10 gift card, or something the department could get, whether people are able to answer questions on the fly, just like you do training for other sort of regulatory style preparation, almost like in a pre-meal huddle if you're in the dining department, or shift, so people are really informed. And I feel like the theme throughout what everyone is talking about, which is certainly on my mind, is communication. Like communicate, communicate, communicate. You know, maybe that's not a fun part of training, but making sure that, you know, if you have a nurse, they're training on the right, pieces that they should be training at, so they feel really like, oh, I understood how this is going to impact my job and my role and how I can do something better. So you're really giving them a set of guidelines to showcase how this will help them. If you have, a chef, you're showing how this is going to, improve the efficiency in their job. So they feel like I'm not just sitting in all these trainings that, is like a check mark. So, a few ways to just, constantly, and I think, your audience, if you're the leader on site, what you're, who you have that you can tap into for help as a partner, really utilize that, I think, as much as possible. You're not in it alone.
I love those ideas, and the idea of making it fun challenges that actually, if you read about habits, that's the way you basically form and create a new habit, is by creating a challenge, by creating a small prize or reward. You actually trick the brain into breaking down old habits and adopting new things. And once you get them to do it and keep up with it over and over again, it just stays as habit, and now it's the norm in your operation and you're using it. And that kind of takes us to our last stage, which is the optimizing and circling back. So imagine now you got the technology in, you're 30, 60 days in. The reality is that technology, you got to keep refining it, tweaking it, adjusting it. And odds are you probably have systems that you use 10% of it. I know there's features in my car that I have no idea how they work. I'm sure you all have things that are big paperweights on your desk where you use 10% of the value from it. So Jill, would be curious to know from you, how do you work with your units to make sure that when they do actually put in a technology solution and they invest their time and their money into it, that they're actually leveraging the full capabilities of the system over time?
Great question. You could probably go down quite a few different rabbit holes there. I think similar to what, my fellow peers on this call have said, there's an ongoing need for continuous training. Oftentimes when you launch and implement, you scratch the surface, and there's a lot of capabilities that are available that aren't necessarily retained because you're trying to solve for, A, B, and C, not recognizing that D, E, and F are also there. So one of the things that we do quite often is we try to simplify whatever it is that we're launching, right? So we try to make, if we're integrating technology, what are the three main things that we're trying to account for? Let's make sure we do those really well. And then we start to add on to that. But we continuously remind everyone of, we live in a world of retention effort, right? Like we all know that the labor model is very difficult. So there's a constant need for revisiting and retraining and recalibrating. That can't go away. How you get there can be like lots of different ways, whether it's, the virtual kind of sound bites of mini training, leveraging tools like yours where you've got constant training available. But then that needs to be standard, right? There needs to be a standard kind of expectation, and we have to set guidelines of what that expectation is. How many hours do you have to have accomplished? How many times do we need to make sure we validate? Do we have to do retraining and recalibration? And then we can start to introduce some of the other enhancements.
Great call out. And I wasn't even thinking about that, but to your point, the turnover, if you're turning over key operators of technology systems every year or two, you might have implemented something on day one and it just gets dropped because the new person doesn't know it. There's not a consistent program to maintain it. And then this big investment you got turns into a paperweight because they don't trust it and it goes away. And we see that all the time, actually.
And the validation with the residents, right? To Jessica's point, like you roll something out because you expect it to be what you need. But if you don't go and gut check that a bit and validate that it's what the residents are looking for or that it's working, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
Love that. That's a great call out. So we got a few minutes left. As we kind of wrap up here, we can all think about, the journey we just went on of dipping our toes in the water, hopefully catching our first wave, not getting too much water up our nose. We've gone through the process of choosing the right technology, ultimately implementing that technology, monitoring that technology, refining that technology, which ultimately brings us to hopefully a very happy group. And we all feel like we can take on that next wave. We can jump on it. We can ride it to ultimately see the benefits and not see change as a scary thing, but ultimately, if we address it the right way and we can find a good solution to help make it manageable, that ultimately we can do really great things from it. As we wrap out here, would love to just wrap up with perhaps one final question, and I'll ask each of you this. And if in 15 seconds or so, if you were to condense down, if those on this webinar could take away one piece of advice today that you could give to help them be as successful as possible in their upcoming years of constantly dealing with the waves of change in technology, what would that be? I'll give you a second to think on it. And then why don't, Ellen, I'll start with you for this one.
I feel like this could, certainly go in so many avenues, but I think one piece is to communicate, over communicate. You can never communicate too much into all the departments that we've mentioned to make sure everybody is informed and your residents. So that would be my one piece of advice if I could only pick one.
I think that's a great piece of advice. Jill, what would yours be?
Well, Ellen stole mine, so I'll have to go with my backup, which would be similarly ask the right questions, right? Make sure that you're really understanding what you're trying to solve for, what's the end goal, and ask multiple people that question, not just the C-suite, not just necessarily the stakeholders, but who are the true stakeholders. So ask really good questions.
I think that's a really good call out. It's so easy to sometimes take the shortcut of just seeing a solution, thinking that it's going to solve everything, buying it, and then realizing that that easy decision actually puts way more on you, and you're not solving for ultimately the root problem, which is a good call out. I do it all the time in business, so I'm very guilty of it, and my team will say the same. Jessica, what would yours be?
Well, it's tough going last because you guys have great ideas. I think that it's just to come to terms with the fact that, well, we know we have all of these challenges. Technology is not going away, it's coming. So we really have to understand, how do we embrace it, utilizing all the things we talked about today, but we really need to embrace it and understand the value that it can lend to what we do every day. And if anything, keeping our residents, right? What is our end goal? It's the resident experience. So keeping that in mind and understanding that we have an obligation to evolve and utilize technology to create that experience that they deserve.
Very well said. Love it. I know we are just wrapping up and tight for time today. So what I'd suggest is, and I know we've got a whole bunch of questions that have come in, why not, as a follow-up, to make sure that we can get appropriate answers to some of those questions, why don't we take this, we could turn this into a nice little blog, or all of us could connect again, put our thoughts on it, share it out with everybody that joined the webinar, so they've got some nice resources to take home with them, and make sure that we can put good attention to it and not rush through them. So with that, thank you so much to our panel. Greatly appreciate all of you taking time out of your very busy days. And Paige, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, well, thank you so much, everyone. That was a fantastic panel. You shared some wonderful information. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. With that, we'll go ahead and we will wrap up. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.